The Book of Jonah is unique among the prophetic books in that it is almost entirely narrative. It's one big story, or it's a small story, except, of course, for the second chapter, which is taken up by a psalm. For the purposes of this course, in this session, I'm going to look at the short narrative section at the beginning of the second chapter and the closing verse of the chapter. Next session, I'll deal separately with the psalm. So the chapter begins. The Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah remained in the fish's belly 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish. Of course, the one thing that everyone knows about the book of Jonah is that Jonah got swallowed by a whale. And if someone knows one more thing about the book of Jonah, they probably know that it technically wasn't a whale. It's a big fish. The ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, called the Septuagint, calls it a ketos, which means sea monster. The old Latin translation, the Vulgate, has dominus piscem, or large dominating fish. Our ancient forebears didn't worry too much about the distinction of big fish and whale. Big fish, or sea monster, would have fit right in with the Old Testament's favorite sea monster, Leviathan, which shows up several times in the Psalms and the book of Job. It wasn't until the Enlightenment that people actually started worrying about what exact kind of fish this was. A year after Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species, Anglican priest and theologian Edward Pusey compiled a list of 4 potential sea animals that could potentially swallow and house a human for 3 days. A white shark, a lamia, a menschenfresser, or man-eater, and the sea calf. At a time when science was on the rise and religion was forced to react to scientific claims of truth, you can see why some theologians felt the need to consult zoology and marine biology when tackling the Book of Jonah's most well-known feature. In the end, though, we don't know exactly what kind of fish it was because the text doesn't explicitly tell us. There are times that the Bible is painstakingly exact and precise. The Bible knows how to do detail when it wants to. It just doesn't do that here. So what we're left with here is, it was a big fish. It does get a little interesting, though, because in the first verse, the text uses the masculine form of fish, dag, and yet in the second verse it uses the feminine form of the word daga. There are moments in the Hebrew Bible where a feminine pronoun or feminine verb is used with a masculine noun, but in no other place is the same noun rendered in both masculine and feminine forms in the same text. Was it a mistake? Did a scribe mess it up? Probably not, as the oldest manuscripts we have of Jonah include the 2 gendered nouns. Some of the ancient rabbis suggested that there must have been therefore 2 fish, an initial male fish that swallowed him, and then a subsequent female fish who took him the rest of the way and spit him up on the shores of Nineveh. There's even a midrash that says that Jonah's time in the male fish's belly was too comfortable. he wanted to stay there. So God then put him in a female fish where he had to share his space with hundreds of baby fish. This was so cramped and uncomfortable that Jonah was sufficiently prepared to go about his prophetic business. The best explanation I've heard on the subject is that it references the shift within the psalm that will follow, where Jonah's journey in the sea is both an experience of near death and an experience of a womb-like experience, which maybe you could say is near birth. And so in the text, the womb-like nature of Jonah's oceanic journey needs to have both a masculine and a feminine side to it. Jonah is in this fish womb for 3 days and 3 nights. A period of 3 days appears often in the Hebrew Bible, oftentimes to denote the period of time it takes for a journey to go somewhere. Oftentimes those journeys are into the wilderness to approach and pray to God. Of course, the New Testament will pick up on the 3-day sojourn of Jonah in the belly of the fish as an allusion to Jesus's 3 days in the tomb. We'll look at this in a separate session. Jonah, who was pretty stingy on words in the first chapter and who never once addresses God directly there, then launches into prayer from the belly of the fish. We'll get to the substance of that prayer in the next session. The last verse of the second chapter is, "The Lord commanded the fish, and it spewed Jonah out upon dry land." As I've said before, though the book of Jonah is short, it uses words skillfully and artfully. It paints a picture. The fact that Jonah is spewed or vomited certainly paints a picture. The sense here is that this was a thoroughly unpleasant thing for Jonah. And of course, this is how it was meant to be. Jonah disobeyed God, and so what follows isn't meant to be a cakewalk. If you do the opposite of what God wants for you, then things probably will become unpleasant. It is interesting to me the details that we don't get. We don't get a technicolor image of what 3 days in the acid-filled, damp, hot belly of a fish was actually like. Have you ever gone fishing and had to gut a fish? What you pull out isn't pretty. To be in that claustrophobic, slimy soup would have been as terrible of a time as I can imagine.